Hi everyone, Yana is here, and in this video I wanted to show you a card that I did using supplies mostly from Hero Arts. So here I have a large background stamp, Tiny Flags stamp from Hero Arts. I really like that background. I think it's very trendy and modern. I also have a couple of different inks from ClearSnap, a paintbrush that I'll be using to do some coloring. I also have different kinds of embossing ink. Here I have an embossing pad and an embossing ink in a bottle. I also have some embossing powder, which is this gold embossing powder from Hero Arts, and some watercolor paper for my project. So I'm starting by inking my large Hero Arts stamp using some embossing ink, and because my embossing pad seemed a little bit too dry for such a large area, I decided I needed to use this bottle of embossing ink, and this is from Stimpendos. Mine is with Ukrainian label, has a Ukrainian label on it, but they have the same kind of embossing ink with an American label, and I'm sure you can find it online somewhere. And I really like using that particular ink in a bottle because it's much easier to apply it to a large surface. So after I've inked my stamp, I put my paper on top of it, and then I used this tool from also from ClearSnap, and I rolled it across my paper, and I made sure I applied even pressure onto my cardstock, and then I sprinkled my paper with some gold embossing powder from Hero Arts. So this is just some basic heat embossing that I'm doing to start my background, and then I used a paintbrush that I was going to use to color my background, but at first I used it to remove some of the excess embossing powder. I got some embossing powder on some of the areas that I didn't want, so I used my paintbrush to remove that. Now I'm simply using several colors of ink from ClearSnap, and I'm going to try to mix them together to create sort of like a peachy color, or like a peach color. I saw this gold and peach color combination online, and I really liked it, and I wanted to try that on a project of mine. When I started looking through my inks, I couldn't find any peach colored ink pads, so I decided I could try to create my own color, and I decided to use different colors of ClearSnap pigment ink. It's a water-based ink, so you can add water to it, and it will sort of like react with water, and you'll be able to mix the colors together. So this is what I'm doing right here. I'm mixing several colors of pigment ink from ClearSnap. So this is a color box pigment ink, and I'm adding some water, and I'm using a paintbrush just to mix the colors and apply them to my surface. So like I said before, I'm using watercolor paper, and this is the smooth side of my paper. After I was done applying color to my background, I spritzed it a couple of times with water just to create a little bit of a watercolory look, and I decided I wanted to set it aside and let it dry on its own. I could have used a heat tool for this, but I didn't want to mess up any of the embossing powder that I had, so I simply set it aside and moved on to creating some additional sentiments or additional elements for my card. So here I have a stamp set from Studio Calico and Hero Arts, and I'm going to use it to create a little banner and a little sentiment for my card. Once again, I'm using almost identical supplies. I'm using clear embossing ink. I'm stamping the image in clear embossing ink, and I'm using gold embossing powder from Hero Arts. I really like this particular gold embossing powder because it's nice and I don't know, maybe crisp, well, not crisp, detailed. So I'm able to emboss really small and really detailed images really well with this embossing powder. I have other kinds of embossing powders, but this, for some reason, I tend to use this one more often than the other brands of embossing powder. So after I was done heat embossing my sentiment, I decided that my card needed some extra elements. So I reached for another set from Hero Arts. This is a birthday set, and I really like it. And I decided to use these little sketchy stars from that set. So once again, I used my clear embossing ink and gold embossing powder and embossed a few of the stars. Now, because I had some leftover ink on my clear block, I decided to utilize it. So I simply spritzed it a couple more times with water to re-wet the ink and make it more, I don't know, paintable, I guess. So I spritzed it with water, and then I used my paintbrush once again to apply ink to several areas, or maybe to color my entire banner, and then to color my gold embossed stars. Then I decided to go back to my background and check on how it was doing, and I noticed that I had just a little bit too much water on my background. So I grabbed a paper towel and I dabbed any excess water that I had, and once again set it aside to dry. Now, when I used these these sketchy stars from that other stamp set from Hero Arts, I really liked the other sentiment from there, the "No dream is ever too big," and I decided I wanted to make another card, like another gold embossed card using that stamp. So here I have that stamp heat embossed with gold embossing powder on some watercolor cardstock, and once again I'm using a paintbrush and some color box pigment inks to add some color to that sentiment. And notice that I'm using a much smaller, like a little teeny tiny brush this time to add color just into several areas of that sentiment. So I'm simply outlining the words, and then I made like a little brush stroke element in the center. After I was done with that, I decided to go back to my background. Sorry, I'm going back and forth here, but I wanted to show you exactly, I wanted to show you this video like exactly as I was doing my card, and I was going back and forth all the time. So I went back to my background and I trimmed it down, and I thought that it wasn't shiny enough, you know, I know it sounds weird because, hey, all of that gold embossing powder is pretty shiny on its own, but the other areas, the areas that didn't have the embossing powder, they seemed kind of dull to me. So I used this spray from Studio Calico, and I simply spritzed my backgrounds a couple of times and added a little bit more shine or a little bit more shimmer to them. After that, I decided I wanted to add some stitching to my background, so I ran that background through my sewing machine a couple of times, and noticed that I didn't have a straight, I didn't stitch following a straight line. And that was done intentionally. I wanted all of that stitching to look a little bit messy, so this is what I did here for that card. And here you can see both cards completely nice and ready, and I really like the way that turned out. One has some color variations and the other one is just plain heat embossed with a little bit color, a little extra color on the sentiment. I really hope that you like this video and that it gave you some ideas on how you can mix different colors of inks and maybe create some custom coloring for your heat embossed backgrounds. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!